Well, hello, and welcome to another edition of Becoming a Gibborim. Are you ready to become mighty? Get in line, because everybody should be ready to be mighty. This is definitely the time and the days for us to seize upon unique and spectacular opportunities which are being offered to us now like never before. If you haven't smelt it recently, the air is ripe with deliciousness, and by that I mean the souls of men. If you don't know about the souls of men, we're going to have to back this series up, and you're going to have to jump back in way earlier. Go back to part 1, 2, and 3, especially part 3. You've got to learn about spirit, body, and soul, and you got to recognize that the soul that we're seeking is the mind, the will, the emotions of individuals, and we are trying to capture that because there is always an ever-present darkness which is stalking people, an actual, almost supranatural intelligence source that's perpetually pouring itself out and waging a relentless war against the minds of men and women and children every single day. And they do seek with absolute vigor to perpetually grab a hold of and seize and weaponize the souls of man. So if you haven't noticed that lately, that's okay. It's a good day for you to recognize and learn about the tactics of the enemy and how you yourself personally, as in the person I'm actually looking at right now, you can become weaponized to be far more effective for the kingdom of righteousness than you ever thought was possible. Because if you really want to be mighty, you know what it's not going to take? The ultimate sniper rifle in the history of mankind. It's not going to make you into the American sniper, actually, because you know what happened to him? He ended up murdered. Shocker. People who live by that kind of a sword tend to also die by that kind of a sword because they get betrayed by the people that they put their faith in a lot of ways. And it's real. There's a lot of SKTs, special kill teams out there, that if you go do work for them for long enough, like said American Sniper, they tend to come back and put calling cards back on you because you tend to do work for people that don't want that kind of stuff seeing the light of day ever again. And when you're a death dealer, it tends to be that the Reaper comes hunting for his pound of flesh. True story. So check out Soul Ties and The Cost of Killing. That's a fantastic episode if you've ever considered that. The soul hunting that I'm talking about today is not going to involve as much of that kind of a sword. That being said, there's going to be a lot of talk today about blades because there's going to be more spears in people's hands again. And spears are incredibly important. But spears, as much as they are a close-up actionable tool, they're also a distance weapon. We're going to see someone who uses a spear right now to send a message that is far more effective than a chunk of lead could ever hope to be. And I'm really excited about this week one because today we're going to learn about super weapons. Yes, if you're hunting souls for the kingdom of righteousness, you can have super weapons available to you that are not available to anybody else, not even in the mimicry camp of the kingdom, because I'll probably talk about Men in Black at some point in here. Probably. I don't know. It's a fitting day. We're going to talk about the Slumber. There's a weapon that you can be bestowed upon you or you can use to completely cause everybody around you to fall asleep to such an extent that you can sneak up right up onto their face and they would never even know it. And it happens a lot. If you haven't read The Sword of Awesomeness recently, highly recommended. It will basically feed you and teach you about ways of sneaking and getting around and using reconnaissance, finding out information surreptitiously. That's like sneakily. And you need to find out information sometimes very sneakily. Like right now. Right now is still kind of a lull in the storm out there, and it's a really good time to gather some intelligence. It's a good time to go scouting. If you didn't know it, I am an Eagle Scout, which means I was unfortunately, in some ways, raised up through the ranks of the Boy Scouts. There's some really good things that I learned in that. I learned a lot of very valuable skill sets, which were spectacularly beneficial throughout the rest of my life. A lot of that had to do with discipline. The big bad nasty that we got to point out here right now is that it's an oath-keeping secret society as well. True story. I got initiated into the Order of the Arrow. They have all these secret passwords just like every other Luciferian cult tends to do. They've got a lot of that kind of stuff going on in there. True story. And if you don't know about that, go ahead and look it up. Somebody out there has been a whistleblower and gave away the secret passwords of the Order of the Arrow. Good job for you, buddy, because we're supposed to expose what people do in darkness. And the Order of the Arrow is one of these elite clubs inside the Boy Scouts of America that you can get secretly initiated into and then have no memory of what happens next. Really, a lot of hallucinatory drugs can be involved and have been known to be involved at times in some of these rites of passage, because a lot of them are based off Native American traditions, in a sense. Yeah, a lot of it is Babylonian magic and mysticism, as usual. Tends to things like that go back to Sumer. It's a bad place. Not necessarily the land itself, just the gods that have ruled over it, where the nations were divided according to the number of the sons of God. Check out Psalm 82 is a really good one. If you haven't known that there's a divine council that reigns over the earth is divided to spiritual territories as well as physical territories. And because of that, there's principalities, powers, rulers, dominions, and authorities that sit over all these different places, and the earth is divided, and they should be righteous gods. They should be, right? They should be righteous. Elohim is a better word. It's like the spiritual, the physical and plural, the singular and the plural form of God, gods. Angels could fall into there. The Most High, Elohim, like Yahweh, he falls into that category of like the Elohim. But the earth has been divided and separated according to the number of the sons of Elohim. So because of that, there is certain gods, Elohim, that rule over different territories, spiritual territories and physical territories, that actually disseminate out through a spiritual hierarchy and then through a physical hierarchy their will and their commands on the earth. It's a very, very, very interesting system. Dr. Michael Lake, highly recommend his research on it. Dr. Michael Heiser is another one who's done some fantastic work on it. If you haven't looked into those fellows recently, check it out. There's some meat, like so much meat, you will probably never digest it all because our bodies are weak to digesting meat. Mine too. Sign me up for that class. I've been signed up for it for a long time. I've got stacks of research from Dr. Michael Lake that he sent me one day, which was a miracle. And I waged my way through that, and it took me a long time to digest it. I still am digesting it. It was fantastic. But there's all kinds of things like that that are happening out there that it's really important to understand, because Yahweh has counselors. He does. He actually has a divine council. He takes counsel with them, and they make decisions together collectively. He's a supreme authority, but he also makes decisions with counselors, other spiritual hierarchy of righteous Elohim that did not rebel. But then there's a similar one. Think of, Mount Olympus. If you haven't, that's Greek and Roman mythology that kind of deals with like different gods contending and trying to fight their way up to the top of the pyramid, right? It's really kind of the upside down pyramid. It's an inverted pyramid in a serious way. It's a descension cult as much as it's an ascension cult. So those ones are reigning and seeking to usurp other principalities or powers in order that they might be able to rule and capture the souls of men. Because you see, the real players in the history of the world understand that it's not a game for money, power, control. It's a game for the souls of men. That's all that it really comes down to, is the spirits and the souls of men. Those are what are the real currency in existence, because eternity is at stake. Actually, your eternity is at stake. Every single individual and every single person who's out there right now living through their life, who may be finally contemplating the fact that they may be actually living in a time where their normal is never coming back, and they're going to have to live in a society where they themselves might be the active, persecuted individuals in what used to be a free and open society. I say that with unbelievable amounts of caveats, that we've basically been free to be slaves inside a rat race for a long time. But now when we go to the stores, you can actually experience what it's like to go in a rat race. Really. You got the arrows going this way and the arrows going that way, and check-in lines, check-out lines that are regulated by people that have screening capabilities. It's getting wild out there. I'm trying to tell you guys, get ready for it. But today, we're going to jump into a little bit of the story in 1 Samuel. If you haven't been tracking along with us, we are studying mighty men and mighty women. These are people that were tested in a serious way, to such an extent that the literal blood, sweat, and tears of their body oozed out, and they spilled it out on the face of the earth in order to stand either in direct opposition to the righteous people and or to contend for the righteous and see justice and deliverance and hope and mercy extended to those who were oppressed. And it makes them powerful. It makes them very unique. And as usual, we're jumping right back into David, his mighty men, some of my favorite characters in the history of known time, like, get ready for this, spear hunters. Because some of these guys straight up are just going to hunt spears today. So let's jump in, shall we? By the way, if you haven't read this personally for yourself with your own eyes, you must do so. This is a fantastic chapter, and if you want to learn about these awesome weapons that are available to us, you need to read it. Sometimes maybe consider reading the scriptures out loud. It's far more effective. It's like an actual agreement when we speak it out loud, and it's very powerful. Check into it. Anyways, this is 1 Samuel 26. Then the Ziphites came to Saul at Gibeah, saying, "Is not David hiding in the hill of Hachilah, which is before J.A.S.O.N?" So Saul arose and went down to the wilderness of Ziph, having with him about 3,000 chosen men of Israel, to search for David in the wilderness of Ziph. Saul camped in the hill of Hachilah, which is before J.A.S.O.N, beside the road, and David was staying in the wilderness. When he saw that Saul came after him into the wilderness, David sent out spies, and he knew that Saul was definitely coming. Pause here. This is why spies and scouts are vitally important. In your little intelligence gathering operations, you're going to need spies. I talked a little bit about this when I came into like witness protection and some of those other chapters, but spies are fundamentally critical to the kingdom of the Messiah, and they don't get a lot of press coverage except for maybe Rahab. Rahab sometimes gets some press coverage when it comes to the spies that she sheltered, but I don't think there's a lot of people that recognize that there is so much need for the body of Messiah to have spies inside it and active in it. There's a lot of people who have never realized that they're the perfect spy because you just blend in by being you. You're just someone who knows how to just be a person, just a normal dude or dudette. And that's a very powerful skill set because when people, most of them, envision the spies, I think they're all these shows and movies that have brainwashed you and indoctrinated you into thinking that it looks a certain kind of way or it has this mystique and this vigor and this like unbelievable, tense, violent potential for danger at any given moment. It doesn't genuinely look like that most of the time. If you ask guys who actually like have been in the military for a long time, done a lot of tours in Afghanistan and Iraq, or places where guerrilla warfare was the methodology by which a lesser opponent withstood or tried to contend against a much mightier one, spies tend to be children. The most active spies you tend to deal with in real-world situations tends to be the youngins. Do you know why that is? Just think about that for a moment. There's something about children that makes them unbelievably better at being spies than adults. And what is it? Have you ever thought about this? This is why I believe the Boy Scouts of America has one of the biggest finders programs for secret societies and other oath-keeping brotherhoods that are out there. They use these as finder programs to find and sift through candidates. Actually, this is how they find and recruit people into things like the CIA. Yes, the other the Central Intelligence Agency. So there's a lot of reasons that they're looking for children to be spies. But the predominant reason above all of them is just that children tend to blend in and not be noticed as much. Now, granted, there's some places where children just should not really be there, but they're a lot less than you think. And because of that, children tend to be some of the best spies that anybody ever deployed and employed out there. They can be some of the most unique observers in existence because they look at the world through lenses that have not been blurred and have not been fuzzed out by the systems of the world in the same way. They still have a sense of understanding about the world that is unique and rare. Their physical five senses tend to also just be a lot better. I love the people that have aged a little more than I have at this point, but the hearing, the vision, there's some senses that tend to just get diminished because, a truck backfired next to your ear cannon one day. Boom. And then you just never heard the same. Or you just really liked loud music and were a thrasher. Tom Dunn comes to my mind. His hearing was not as attuned as I was hoping it may be when we were listening to music. When we did a secret scouting mission in the mountains of Arizona, we did a secret documentary that we filmed down there. Someday I'll have to get that out there to you guys. It's a lot of work to do that. But it's really fun, in a sense, to be a spy. And as a child, you have an opportunity to be able to get and gather information and then bring it back and report it in a very unique way. And so because of that, it makes you a perfect candidate. So don't forget here that David and his mighty men that are in the wilderness right now are also with their families. And I know that people have never really thought about that the mighty people that are in some of David's stories right here are children. but I think they really are. Because back then in their society, they treated their children way differently than we do in a lot of ways. And the predominant one of that was that they gave them much greater responsibility, way more responsibility. When you think of shepherds guarding the flocks at night, these little children that are out there keeping watch over their flocks, it's a huge responsibility. I'm shepherding goats right now. It's the first time in my life. I've waited a long time to try to have some livestock around me, and it's incredibly difficult. Goats are ornery, and they earn their reputation for real. They're difficult, but I love their milk. It's delicious. But to be entrusted to watch over the shepherd, the sheep and the rams and the goats or the cattle, that's people's wealth. That's like it'd be like you always gave your child all your money. Like all your money. If you just always gave them your money everywhere they went all the time, well, that's totally different. Why would I do that? They'd be irresponsible. No, it's because they trained up their children to become men and women immediately. Like they started right away. Have you ever considered reading the whole Bible to your children right away at 0 years old? Like the day they're born, just start reading the scriptures to them, all of it, all the way through from the beginning to the end, even the parts that are hard or intense. What kind of children do you think that would shape if your child had memorized the book of Zechariah by the time they were 6? Because there's lots of children that are 6 years old that had memorized the book of Zechariah. True story. Look into it. The children are far more capable of memorizing things other than the Disney nonsense that is being pummeled through their ears all the time. And you could have them being trained up right now to be the best scouts and the most effective kingdom workers in the history of mankind. Because I believe each and every child that has been born, let's just say for the past, 50 years, has been made for such a day as this. But really, if you think about children that are born today, right now, into these kinds of situations and these crises and the actual realities of where our children are growing up in now, their paradigm is so set apart and so different than the one you and I were raised in even 10 years ago, 20 years ago. And because of that, they have an opportunity to be a standard that is so completely set apart. That's another word for holy. Set apart from the ways of the world. They could be something that is peculiar. They could become part of the peculiar priesthood that honors and ministers to the kingdom and to the body of the Messiah. And it would make them so effective and so powerful that I really believe they could stand and contend with the very gates of Hades itself. Because don't forget, at the end of all this, Hades himself comes out and commands armies that are so good, they're going to take basically portions of the entire earth captive or to destruction. Don't forget, the enemy has in his camp coming out, he's got death as his general. Like they actually get death for their general. They get Hades for their other general. How good do you think those two are at waging war and or bringing death? But Yahweh says he's going to raise up standards against that. And who are the people who raise up those generations? I believe that's us. I believe that's people right now have the opportunity to seek to raise up their children to be ready to engage for such a time as this. So I say all that because there's a lot of time that has been invested in raising up children to be spies for the kingdom of darkness every single day. And I think it's really critical that we think of ways to be creative about teaching our children to instead be spies who hunt for the souls of mankind. Instead, they're the children that can observe the things in other people around them and be not afraid, because generally by the time we're older, we have built up such a fear of man that it's hard for us to even talk to a stranger. But I never have to tell my 3-year-old not to I don't have to teach my 3-year-old that she should be nice and talk to other children. That's easy for her. She doesn't even think about it. She doesn't have all those, but they might be not kind to me, or they might think I'm weird, or why would I talk about that? She doesn't have any of those inhibitions. And that's what children are rich in. They're rich in contentment and understanding that, you know what, today is just today. And it doesn't always have to be full of all the bondages from my past. They're not as wounded, and that's so powerful. So I say all that to try to just encourage you to recognize in this story, there's a lot more going on when people just say they sent out spies. It's important that you send spies that are effective for their strategies that are possible to them. All right, let's jump back in though. Now, David then arose and came to the place where Saul had camped. And David saw the place where Saul lay, and Abner, the son of Ner, the commander of his army, and Saul was lying in the circle of the camp, and the people were camped around him. That's pretty good OPSEC, operational security. You have Saul in the very center, and then his best bodyguards, commanders of his army, and then rings of troops all around him. That genuinely is pretty much an impenetrable position. If you're David looking in on that, normally you see, oh wow, I have no idea how I'm going to get in there. Not David though. Check this out. Then David said to Ahimelech the Hittite and Abishai, the son of Zeruiah, Joab's brother, saying, who will go down with me to Saul in the camp? And Abishai said, I will go down with you. So David and Abishai came to the people by night, and behold, Saul lay sleeping inside the circle of the camp with his spear stuck in the ground at his head, and Abner and the people were lying around him. Then Abishai said to David, today Yahweh has delivered your enemy into your hand. Now, therefore, please let me strike him with the spear to the ground with one stroke, and I will not strike him the second time. But David said to Abishai, do not destroy him, for who can stretch out his hand against Yahweh's anointed and be without guilt? And David said, as Yahweh lives, surely Yahweh will strike him, or his day will come that he dies, or he will go down into battle and perish. Yahweh forbid that I should stretch out my hand against Yahweh's anointed. But now, please, take the spear that is at his head and the jug of water, and let us go. Oh my goodness. Have you thought about this? David sees opportunistic hunting when he sees an entire army of people laying there at night. Because here's the big thing. It's a lot easier than you think to sneak one or two people into an army of 3,000 men. And it just says the chosen men. What it doesn't talk about is the supply chain. There's almost always a huge supply chain that comes with any time any military moves, because 3,000 humans eat constantly. There's so much water, there's so much food that is needed, there's so much transportation. There's all of these things that are needed. Like generally, a lot of times, you can have a 4-to-1 ratio for your infantrymen to the whole supply chain that supports them. And so you could be looking at more like 12,000, 15,000 maybe, that would have to be moved and relocated in order to do that. Which means, a lot of times, you can blend in just fine. And so David takes with him one battle buddy against, let's say, just 3,000. We'll just leave it at that number. But because of that, David has another super weapon that's about to be pulled out here that's so mighty, it needs to be given its proper time. But I needed to make sure that you caught something here before we move on. David here, this is the second time, by the way, that David has an opportunity to slaughter King Saul. And yet this time, he is not tempted with the bloodlust like he was before. This time, he has a standing order of understanding that the authority, the proper hierarchy, is Yahweh as the avenger. Yahweh is the avenger. Yahweh is the one who just did this for Nabal. Remember, Yahweh petrified Nabal, turned him to stone. That's pretty spectacular. If you serve the Most High Elohim above all the other Elohim, he can actually avenge you of your enemies immediately. Like, there's times I've prayed prayers of forgiveness, lots of forgiveness for people that have done horrible things. There's also times that I've prayed, if these people would not repent, that Yahweh would stop their hearts so they can't cause harm to another child. That's a on the edge prayer. Do you know what I'm saying? That's right on the borderline. But here you see David also recognizes that it's in Yahweh's hands what he wants to do with Saul. But if David takes Saul's life, it would be stealing. That's thievery. Right? That's the greatest sin. That's Cain's sin, right? You don't want to bear the mark of Cain against Yahweh's anointed. So David has the proper understanding of that hierarchy. And because of that, David receives the blessing of a super weapon right here. You ready for this? So David took the spear and the jug of water from beside Saul's head, and they went away. But no one saw or knew it, nor did any awake, for they were all asleep, because a deep slumber from Yahweh had fallen on them. There is a slumber that can come upon your enemies if you are in need. You can pray that the Father would put your enemies to sleep, and they actually will. This is not even kind of a tool that can be underestimated. If you're the King of Glory and you want your one chosen servant or somebody else to be able to get into somewhere, you can open doors that no man can shut. You can shut doors that no man can open. You can make people walk through walls. You can also make everybody inside that place fall asleep. Have you read the book of Acts recently? Shoot, son, get to it. It's important. You need to read it. You also need to read the book of Judges because you see this a lot. And this is because there's something that is so vitally important when you need to make an escape or you need to infiltrate, and that's sleepiness. If you can get people sleepy, you can literally do anything else you want to them. When people are in that slumbery daze, it's unbelievable the things that you can accomplish during that time. And this is how people in the underground church, in non-permissive environments, this is how they get through places like checkpoints. Because guess what? Checkpoints are coming. Do you ever consider that? If checkpoints show up, bad day, bro, for most humans. Checkpoints are a totally different level of you better know what you're doing. And if you don't go in the name, the proper name and the hierarchy of who it is that you should be going with, if you don't go under the right authority, you're going to get so toasted right at the checkpoints. Checkpoints are tough, man. But you know what? The Father can provide you peace and deliverance and blindness to the eyes of people. You need to start reading about the persecuted church immediately. It would be very helpful for you. If you haven't, read God Smuggler, one of the greatest ones. Fantastic. I also think you should read Tortured for Christ. I think it's one of the best books you can ever read because it'll also prepare you for the fact that some of you are also to go to the sword. And that's just part of it. It's part of the kingdom work. That being said, the slumber of Yahweh is something that is so vital and so critical. And I pray that each of you would begin to study it because this isn't the only time it happens. This is just a time I want to zero in on because David actually gets to take the spear that was thrown. I believe it's probably the spear that Saul always had in his hand, remember? Because every day of Saul's life is devoted to finding ways to murder David. And you know what he always has with him during those stories? This spear. And what you're seeing is that Yahweh literally puts in David's hand the very tools that were created or were set apart for his own destruction, and instead puts him back into his hand and uses that to send a message of mercy. You see that? Mercy. He takes the weapon of destruction and turns it into mercy. And this is exactly what our Messiah did for us. Let's flip over to Colossians, okay? If you haven't read Colossians, come on. It's not huge. You could memorize the whole book tomorrow, or you could etch the entire book into a sword that you made. And I think you should do that too. But check this out. David disarmed Saul. You know what Yeshua did? Jesus, the Messiah, disarmed that spiritual hierarchy we were talking about earlier. The B'nai Ha-Elohim, the sons of Elohim, the fallen watchers, seraphim, cherubim, these like rebellious spirits that have fallen and transformed themselves out of the image that they were made into and into a not so good thing, right? The dragon, think of that. This is Colossians 2:15. When he had disarmed the rulers and the authorities, he made a public display of them, having triumphed over them through him. He disarmed the principalities, the powers, the rulers, the dominions, the authorities. He disarmed them. He took the weapons that were once in their hands and snatched them out of their hands. It says he took captivity itself captive. But the most important thing I believe that he took was the keys of death. He took the keys from he who had the power over death, which was the dragon. The dragon had dominion over death. Death is an entity, not just a thing that happens when you die. Death is an entity. Yeshua, Jesus, came when he actually went into the hollow of the earth and down all the way to Tartarus, where the watchers were enchained for their sins of rebellion, Genesis 6, and Jude and James. Read about it, 1 Peter, 2 Peter. When he did that, he triumphed over them, and he literally made a show of them. Triumph. If you haven't read about Roman triumphs, it's a big deal. They tend to also build arches, which is another big deal. Think of Chad Schaefer and his book on the arches. Fantastic. Is it Egypt? Oh, man. I forgot the book name. It's referenced in my book. I just lost it, though. Back to Egypt, out of Egypt. The triumphal arches. Anyways, look up Chad Schaefer and his wonderful work on that. He has a show called Disputed Lands. Highly recommend him. He is one of dearest brothers. His talk from Take on the World in 2019 was one of the most heartfelt cries of powerful teaching, but also just a man weeping and screaming for mercy that was so powerful, it still echoes with me to this day. I absolutely love that. I recommend you go check that one out if you haven't recently. But that being said, a triumph was literally where you paraded your defeated enemies around, mockingly so. Where you like dragged them around, sometimes like stripped of all of their authority, sometimes stripped naked, right? Think of what they did to our King and our Messiah. They did that to the kings of the earth. They would drag them around and just show off how they trumped them. They would show off all the spoil a lot of times that they took from them as they did that. This is what Yeshua did when he went back down into the earth. And when he came back up, he took all the captives that were once held captive by death and Sheol and the grave, and he also raised them up. That's so mighty. He showed them that, right? That being said, this is exactly what David does here. Then David crossed over to the other side and stood on the top of the mountain at a distance with a large area between them. David called to the people and to Abner the son of Ner, saying, "Will you not answer, Abner?" Then Abner replied, "Who are you who calls to the king?" So David said to Abner, "Are you not a man? And who is like you in Israel? Why then have you not guarded your lord, the king? For one of the people came to destroy the king, your lord. This thing that you have done is not good. As Yahweh lives, all of you must surely die, because you did not guard your lord, Yahweh's anointed. And now see, where's the king's spear and the jug of water that was at his head?" Then Saul recognized David's voice and said, "Is this your voice, my son David?" And David said, "It is my voice, my lord the king." He also said, "Why then is my lord pursuing his servant? For what have I done? Or what evil is in my hand? Now, therefore, please let my lord the king listen to the words of his servant. If Yahweh has stirred you up against me, let him accept an offering. But if it is men, cursed are they before Yahweh, for they have driven me out today so that I would have no attachment with the inheritance of Yahweh, saying, 'Go, serve other Elohim.' Now then, do not let my blood fall to the ground away from the presence of Yahweh, for the king of Israel has come out to search for a flea, just as one hunts a partridge in the mountains." Then Saul said, "I have sinned. Return, my son David, for I will not harm you again, because my life was precious in your sight this day. Behold, I have played the fool and have committed a serious error." David replied, "Behold the spear of the king. Now let one of the young men come over and take it." More children. "And Yahweh will repair each man for his righteousness and his faithfulness. For Yahweh delivered you into my hand today, but I refuse to stretch out my hand against Yahweh's anointed. Now behold, as your life was highly valued in my sight this day, so may my life be highly valued in the sight of Yahweh, and may he deliver me from all distress." Then Saul said to David, "Blessed are you, my son David. You will both accomplish much and surely prevail." So David went on his way, and Saul returned to his place. David's mercy literally weaponized deliverance for himself, but also for Saul and his men, because the righteous act that should have happened there was what David said. Every one of them should have been put to death. That's all of his guardians. All of Saul's guardians should have been executed for that. But you know what's really tough? That definitely happens. Actually, if you do your job right at sometimes in your life, a lot of other people are going to die. And that's really important that you start to learn that lesson and understand that. I've talked about this a lot more. I don't need to go into it too much now. But David weaponizes mercy again. And yet the next page, the next chapter, Saul's going to be plotting ways to murder David again. And David what's so powerful though is that David is not showing his skill and his might and his power over and over. He's allowing Yahweh to demonstrate his choice. It is clear that the favor of Yahweh is on David and not on King Saul. And that's the witness that's perpetually raised up in the righteous sons of the living God. It is so important that you begin to see that Yahweh's favor being upon you, even if he drives you into total ruinous situations and poverty and destruction or even death, it's his favor that is upon us that makes us shine. It makes us brilliant. It makes us a bright standard. And you know what? That captures the souls of men. When people see us living in a set-apart way and we see that the power and the authority of living under the Prince of Peace's deliverance, when they see that in us, it makes them jealous for us. It makes them jealous not necessarily for us, but the mighty one we serve. Because people out there right now are looking for mighty ones. They are hunting for them. They want to be one. They want to be around them. They want to be near them. They want to just physically be protected by them. They want to learn from them. They are hungry for them. And the world is offering up their own versions of mighty ones every single day. But we are supposed to be a standard that raises up against it. We are supposed to raise up a generation that is the standard with which the enemy is forced to contend with to such an extent that he cannot destroy it. Even death and Hades cannot destroy the righteous sons of the living Elohim. That is so powerful. That is such a mighty witness, and it will sift. It will be used to help sift the best jewels, the best gemstones out of the hordes of worthless things at the end of time. That is the battle that we are waging for. I hope that you will seek the kingdom authority that has been authored to you, that is waiting for you, if you would just surrender to his mighty and peculiar ways and begin to walk in them. He will disarm the enemies before you. He will take the very weapons that they intended to use for your destruction and instead weaponize them for the most powerful force of freedom and salvation that you could ever know. I hope that you would be vigilant to safeguard the truth and the wonderful wisdom that you've been entrusted with this day. I hope you be vigilant always, even unto death. Remember, you were born for such a time as this. Even though the days may be evil, even though it may be scary and filled with trepidation, I know the one who can free you from your fears and fill you with a hope that is incorruptible, with absolute immortality as the promise that is assured to you if you put your trust in him and you walk in his ways and you keep his covenant. He will guard you, he will shepherd you, and the king who has the keys over life and death in his power, he will be your rear guard. He will watch over you, and he will empower you to fulfill his every word in your life. I hope that his every word would be fulfilled in your life. So stay safe out there. And by that, I mean live strategically, as dangerously as possible, every single day of your life. I love you. Be faithful always, even unto death. I'll talk to you soon. If, by the way, you found this to be beneficial or behooving to you, consider sharing it along. And if you want to know about anything else we're doing or ways that you can partner with us a little bit more so, see the links below. Share it along now. Talk to you soon.